Marcus, 11 years old, dreamed of following in his father's footsteps and becoming a pilot. Sophia, 9 years old, always asked if her father met angels in the clouds when he flew. Michael always responded with scientific explanations about cloud formations and atmosphere phenomena, but secretly he found his daughter's imagination enchanting. At 5:10, Michael left home. The road to the airport was empty. Only a few truck drivers making early morning deliveries. During the 35-minute drive, Michael mentally reviewed the flight plan. 2 hours and 45 minutes of flight over familiar territory. The Boeing he would command was relatively new, only 4 years in service with an exemplary maintenance record. At the airport, Michael met Thomas Rivera, his designated co-pilot, in the briefing room. Thomas was 31 years old and had 8 years of experience as a co-pilot. He was known for his technical competence and easygoing personality. "Good morning," Captain greeted Thomas, already in uniform and with the flight documents neatly organized. Michael appreciated working with Thomas. He was meticulous with procedures, but not overly tense. At 5:50, Michael and Thomas headed toward the aircraft. The Boeing was being fueled and inspected by the ground crew. Michael always arrived at least 1 hour before takeoff to perform a complete external visual inspection of the aircraft. It was a habit he had kept since his Air Force days. He walked around the plane, visually checking the tires, the wings, everything in perfect condition. In the cockpit, Michael began his pre-flight routine with the precision of a watchmaker. Every button, every indicator was checked, following the checklist strictly. Thomas followed along, confirming each item. Meanwhile, the 185 passengers were beginning to board. Michael could hear the movement in the aisle, families talking, children excited and happy about the trip. Among the passengers were several families with small children, businessmen, and elderly couples celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. Ordinary lives, ordinary people, trusting that Michael would take them safely to their destination. At 6:25, Michael requested clearance to start the engines. Requesting clearance to start, he transmitted over the radio. The reply came back clearly. Cleared to start engines. The familiar sound of the engines coming to life filled the cockpit. Michael always felt a special satisfaction at that moment. The transformation of a static machine into something alive and powerful. The pushback began at 628. The tractor pushed the aircraft backward, moving it away from the gate. Michael once again checked all the instruments while the plane was being positioned. All systems showed normal indications. It was exactly as it should be. Ground control, ready for taxi, transmitted Michael. The response was immediate. Michael repeated the instructions, confirming the route. The aircraft began its slow movement along the taxiways of the airport. During taxi, Michael observed other planes preparing for takeoff and landing. The familiar airport routine unfolded as always. It was during this taxi that Michael began to feel something different. An unusual calmness took hold of him. It was not nervousness. Michael never became nervous before flights. It was something more subtle, a sense of serenity he could not explain. It was as if a quiet presence had entered the cockpit, although he could not see anything different. Thomas noticed the change in Michael's expression. "Everything all right, Captain?" he asked. Michael nodded, but he remained intrigued by that strange feeling. In all his time in commercial aviation, he had never felt anything like it. It was comforting, yet also unsettling, because of its inexplicable nature. At 6:40, the aircraft reached the runway holding point. He contacted the control tower. "Ready for takeoff." The reply came after a few seconds. "Hold for clearance." At 6:42, the tower finally transmitted, "Cleared for takeoff." Michael repeated the clearance and slowly guided the aircraft into its final position on the runway. The main wheels aligned with the runway's center line. Michael checked the instruments one last time. Everything was normal. Michael placed his hands on the thrust levers. It was a movement he had performed thousands of times, but in that moment he felt an inexplicable hesitation, something very subtle, almost imperceptible, as if an inner voice whispered for him to exercise extra caution. Michael slowly pushed the levers forward. The engines responded with their familiar roar, and the aircraft began to accelerate. The speed increased progressively. Passengers in their seats felt the force of acceleration pressing them back. Children looked out through the windows. Executives stowed their laptops, everyone preparing to leave the ground. It was exactly at 42 knots of speed that Michael saw something that would change his life forever. A female figure was calmly walking across the runway, directly ahead of the aircraft. She wore a long light blue dress that moved softly with a breeze that did not exist. A white veil partially covered her head, framing a young and serene face. She was approximately 1.63 meters tall and moved with a supernatural grace. What impressed Michael the most was not only the presence of the woman on the runway, but her complete tranquility. Michael immediately pulled back the thrust levers, aborting the takeoff. The engines powered down rapidly. Thomas looked at him in alarm. "Captain, what's wrong?" Michael's eyes remained fixed on the female figure. "There's a woman on the runway." Thomas leaned forward, straining to see. "Captain, I don't see anyone. The runway is clear." "Control, we are aborting takeoff," Michael transmitted urgently. "There's a person on the runway directly ahead of us." The controller's response was immediate and confused. "Negative. We have visual confirmation runway is clear. Our cameras show no obstruction." Michael kept the aircraft stopped, engines idling as he stared intently at the female figure. She kept walking now more slowly, her eyes fixed directly on the cockpit. They were deep eyes filled with an ancient wisdom radiating a peace Michael had never experienced before. When she smiled softly, he felt a wave of absolute protection envelop him. "Control, I can clearly see a woman in a light blue dress walking in front of us," Michael insisted, his voice firm despite the absurdity of the situation. Thomas beside him stretched his neck, trying to see something. "Captain, I don't see anything on the runway." The passengers were beginning to murmur, worried about the sudden and unexpected stop. The control tower immediately dispatched emergency teams. Security vehicles rushed from their bases at high speed, heading toward the runway. Meanwhile, technicians frantically reviewed the recordings from the security cameras, searching for any sign of the person the pilot claimed to be seeing. During those tense minutes, Michael continued observing the female figure. She had stopped walking and now seemed to be blessing the aircraft with gentle gestures of her hands. Her movements were ritualized, as if she were performing a sacred ceremony. The white veil fluttered lightly, occasionally revealing more details of her youthful and serene face. The emergency vehicles reached the runway, inspecting every meter of the asphalt, desperately searching for any sign of a person. Their voices came through the radio. "Tower, runway completely clear. No sign of human presence. Area totally safe for takeoff." 27 minutes passed in this deadlock. Air traffic control, frustrated and confused, decided to review all records of aerial movement in the region. That was when they made a discovery that would explain everything. In the logs appeared the trace of a small aircraft that had irregularly crossed the airport's airspace. The airplane was a Cessna 172 piloted by Daniel Martinez, a 56-year-old farmer who owned a property 40 kilometers from the airport. Daniel had taken off from a private airstrip to pick up veterinary supplies in a nearby town. During his return flight, his transponder and radio suffered technical failures, leaving him unable to communicate with air traffic control. Without transmitting his position and flying at only 500 feet of altitude, his presence went unnoticed by the surveillance systems. The discovery was devastating in its implications. The Cessna had crossed directly into the exact takeoff path of Michael's flight between 6:41 and 6:44 in the morning. If Michael's flight had departed as scheduled, the collision would have occurred approximately 43 seconds after leaving the ground, when the commercial aircraft would have been at about 290 feet of altitude and traveling at 150 knots. The relative speed between the two aircraft would have been catastrophic. The Boeing, climbing and accelerating, would have had no possibility of evasive maneuver. The Cessna, flying low and without radio communication, would never have known of the imminent danger. Air traffic control specialists ran the calculations. The collision point would have been precise and inevitable. The Boeing's left wing would have struck the Cessna's fuselage at a closing speed that would have instantly destroyed both aircraft. Debris would have rained down over a residential area below. The 185 passengers aboard Michael's flight, the crew, and Daniel Martinez in the Cessna, all would have perished instantly. Nearly 200 lives saved by an inexplicable vision that forced Michael to abort takeoff at exactly the right moment. When the control tower informed Michael of the discovery, a profound silence filled the cockpit. Thomas stared at his captain with wide eyes. Michael felt his hands trembling on the controls. The female figure he had seen, the woman in the light blue dress with a white veil, had vanished the moment the emergency vehicles arrived. She had simply disappeared as mysteriously as she had appeared. Michael thought of his daughter Sophia, asking if he met angels in the clouds. Now he understood that perhaps she had been right all along. Perhaps there were angels watching over them in ways that scientific explanations could never capture. The tower cameras had recorded nothing. The ground radar had detected no object at all. Every technical instrument confirmed that the runway had been completely empty. Yet Michael had seen her as clearly as he saw Thomas sitting beside him. He had seen her eyes, her smile, the way the white veil moved in a breeze that did not exist. He had felt the wave of protection that emanated from her presence. No instrument could measure what he had experienced, but it had been real. More real than anything his instruments could show him. Thomas finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Captain, what did you see?" Michael took a deep breath. "I saw what I needed to see to save everyone on this aircraft." Thomas nodded slowly, understanding that some questions had no rational answers. The passengers were informed that there had been a technical issue requiring inspection, nothing more. They never knew how close they had come to death. They never knew that 185 lives, plus crew and one farmer in a Cessna, had been saved by a vision that defied all explanation. After thorough inspections confirmed the runway was clear and the Cessna had passed through the airspace, Michael was cleared for a new takeoff attempt. This time, the acceleration was smooth and uninterrupted. The aircraft lifted off without incident, climbing into the morning sky. As Michael guided the Boeing through its climb, he looked down at the runway growing smaller below. He thought about what had happened, about the impossibility of explaining it to anyone who had not experienced it. His military training, his years of experience, his reliance on instruments and procedures, all of it had been overridden by something beyond measurement. During the flight, Michael found himself replaying the moment over and over. The woman's face, serene and knowing. The light blue dress moving in an impossible breeze. The eyes that seemed to see through time itself, understanding the danger that was coming. The blessing gestures she had made over the aircraft. Thomas maintained professional silence, handling his duties efficiently, but Michael could sense his co-pilot processing what had almost happened. Two experienced pilots, saved by something neither could explain. The rest of the flight proceeded normally. Weather was clear, systems functioned perfectly, passengers relaxed into their journey unaware. When they landed at their destination, Michael went through his post-flight procedures with the same precision as always. But something fundamental had changed inside him. He had always been a man of facts, of measurements, of verifiable data. His military background had reinforced this worldview. Trust your instruments. Follow procedures. Rely on what can be proven. But now he carried knowledge that transcended all of that. He had experienced something that no instrument could detect, no camera could record, no radar could measure. And that experience had saved nearly 200 lives. The implications were staggering. That evening, when Michael returned home, Marcus ran to greet him as always. Sophia followed, her face bright with excitement. "Did you meet any angels today, Daddy?" she asked with her characteristic innocence. Michael knelt down to her level, looking into his daughter's trusting eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," he said softly. "Today, I met an angel. She was wearing a light blue dress, and she saved everyone on my airplane." Sophia's eyes went wide with wonder. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew angels watched over you." Michael pulled both his children close, feeling the weight of gratitude and mystery pressing on his heart. Michael never spoke publicly about what he saw that morning. He filed his official report, noting only that he had aborted takeoff due to perceived runway obstruction. The investigation concluded that his decision, though based on a visual observation that could not be confirmed, had coincidentally prevented a catastrophic mid-air collision. Coincidentally, that was the word the official report used. Michael knew better. Thomas knew better. And somewhere, Daniel Martinez, the farmer who had flown his Cessna through that airspace with failed radio equipment, would never know how close he had come to being part of a tragedy that would have made international headlines. 185 passengers continue their lives, unaware they had been saved by divine intervention. Families celebrated reunions. Business deals were completed. The elderly couple reached their anniversary destination, all because one pilot saw what instruments could not detect and trusted his vision over every piece of technology in front of him. Michael's faith, once built on scientific certainty, now rested on something deeper. He had touched the edge of mystery, had witnessed protection that transcended human understanding. And every time Sophia asked about angels in the clouds, Michael smiled and remembered the woman in the light blue dress who walked across an empty runway and saved 197 lives.